The blood tasted like copper, warm and metallic against his tongue. Marcus Thompson didn't know it yet, but in 8 minutes, 6 people would lose everything they'd spent decades building. In 18 months, one of them would be serving coffee to the same pilots who once called her ma'am. But right now, all Marcus knew was the pressure of plastic handcuffs cutting into his wrists and the cold floor of the aircraft aisle against his cheek. Freeze that image. Hold it there. A 42-year-old black man in an $800 hoodie that looked like it came from Target, bleeding onto first-class carpet while 200 passengers held up their phones like it was a concert. Remember his face, calm even now, even with his vision blurring and his temple throbbing. Because what happened next didn't just change his life, it changed an entire industry. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's rewind. Let's go back to when Marcus Thompson was just another early morning traveler, and the worst thing he expected from his day was jet lag. The Atlanta sun hadn't fully risen when Marcus stepped out of his Buckhead condo, the kind of building where the doorman knew everyone's name but never their net worth. He carried a single leather duffel bag, Italian-made but deliberately scuffed at the corners. The Loro Piana hoodie he wore cost more than most people's rent, but it looked like something a college kid would grab at a mall. The Brunello Cucinelli sneakers on his feet retailed for $600, but they could pass for Nikes in dim light. This wasn't an accident. Marcus had learned a long time ago that invisibility was a superpower when you looked like him. His phone buzzed as the Uber pulled away from the curb. Board meeting reminder. British Airways partnership, $1.2 billion on the table, 15 Boeing 787s ready to redirect from another buyer if Skylink Aviation could close the deal by Friday. 3 days. Marcus had built his company from a single leased Cessna to a fleet of 47 aircraft in 12 years. He'd survived the pandemic when 70% of private airlines folded. He'd convinced investors that a black CEO in aviation wasn't a diversity checkbox, but a competitive advantage in an industry desperate for innovation. And now he was 12 hours away from the kind of deal that would put Skylink on the same map as NetJets and FlexJet. But first, he had to get to London. The memory hit him without warning as the Uber merged onto I-85. He was 3 years old again, small enough that his mother had to lift him onto the diner stool, Macon, Georgia, summer heat thick enough to chew. His father in his Sunday clothes, the only nice outfit he owned, asking politely for a table. The waitress, blonde hair pulled tight enough to stretch her face, looking at them like they'd asked to eat in the kitchen. "We don't serve your kind here." His mother's hand on his father's arm, gentle but firm. "Don't. Let them show who they are. We'll go somewhere else." They'd eaten at a gas station that day, hot dogs from a roller grill. But Marcus never forgot the look on his father's face in the car afterward. Not anger, not even sadness. Just a kind of tired acceptance, like this was the 100th time, not the first, and he knew it wouldn't be the last. "Stay calm," his mother had told him later, tucking him into bed. "When they treat you wrong, baby, you stay calm. You let them make the mistake. You let them show the world who they really are. And then you make sure the world never forgets." Marcus was 3 then. He was 42 now, and he'd spent 39 years perfecting the art of staying calm. Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport swallowed him into its fluorescent belly at 5:43 a.m. The terminal hummed with pre-dawn energy. Business travelers speed-walking toward gates, families herding sleepy children, the smell of burnt coffee and cinnamon rolls competing for dominance. Marcus joined the priority check-in line, first-class ticket on his phone screen, boarding pass ready to scan. The agent behind the counter was young, maybe 25, with the kind of practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her name tag said Sarah Miller. She glanced at his phone, then at him, then back at his phone. The smile flickered. "Let me just verify this." Marcus kept his expression neutral. It's a valid ticket. Booked through the airline directly. Sarah Miller scanned the barcode. Once, twice, 3 times. The system beeped each time, green checkmark appearing on her screen, but she frowned like the computer was lying to her. "Just a moment, sir." She picked up her desk phone, spoke too quietly for Marcus to hear, but he caught the supervisor's approach in his peripheral vision. A man in his 50s, silver hair, navy blazer with the airline logo embroidered on the pocket. His eyes did the same calculation Sarah Miller's had done. Young black man in a hoodie, first-class ticket to London. Something doesn't compute. "Is there a problem?" Marcus asked, voice level, almost friendly. The supervisor smiled, all teeth and no warmth. "Just confirming the ticket origin, sir. Standard procedure for high-value bookings." Standard procedure. Marcus had heard that phrase his whole life. Standard procedure when the department store security followed him through the men's section. Standard procedure when the bank asked for 3 forms of ID to cash a check from his own business account. Standard procedure when the valet at the investor conference assumed he was there to park cars, not pitch deals. "I purchased it yesterday through your website. Confirmation number's right there. You can verify the credit card on file if you need to." The supervisor tapped on Sarah Miller's computer, squinting at the screen. His jaw tightened. The ticket was valid. The credit card was valid. Everything was valid, but the pause stretched too long, the silence too pointed. Finally, "Thank you for your patience, Mr. Thompson. Have a good flight." Marcus took his printed boarding pass and walked away. Behind him, he heard Sarah Miller whisper something to the supervisor. He didn't turn around. He didn't need to. He knew what that whisper sounded like. He'd been hearing it his whole life. TSA security was worse. The line split into 3 channels: regular, TSA, pre-check, and clear. Marcus had both pre-check and clear. He went through the clear lane. Biometric scan, facial recognition, everything automated to minimize human interaction. But when he reached the metal detector, a TSA agent waved him aside. "Random additional screening, sir. Step over here, please." The agent was white, late 30s, with the kind of build that said he'd played high school football and still thought about it. His name tag read Williams. He pointed to a secondary screening area where another agent waited with a metal detection wand and a gray plastic bin. Marcus had flown 217 times in the past 3 years. He'd been randomly selected for additional screening 41 times. He'd done the math. That was a 19% selection rate. The national average was 3%. But he stepped over. Because what else was he going to do? Empty your pockets completely, shoes off, belt off, jacket off? Marcus complied. He'd learned that compliance was survival, that arguing only escalated, that being right didn't matter if you missed your flight or worse. He placed his phone, wallet, keys, and belt in the bin, slipped off his $600 sneakers, stood in his socks on the cold tile floor while Agent Williams waved the wand over his body with exaggerated slowness. Arms out to the side. Marcus spread his arms. Turn around. Marcus turned. The wand beeped near his pocket. Williams frowned. You said you emptied your pockets. I did. Williams reached into Marcus's hoodie pocket and pulled out a pack of gum, held it up like he'd found contraband. What's this? Gum. You said you emptied your pockets. I didn't think gum qualified as something that needed to be removed. Williams stared at him, waiting for something. An apology, maybe, or attitude he could justify escalating. Marcus gave him neither, just waited, arms still out, face blank. The second agent, a woman in her 50s, stepped forward. She looked uncomfortable. Sir, we're going to need to do a pat-down. Why? Standard procedure for anomalies during screening. There was that phrase again, standard procedure. Marcus glanced at the clock on the wall. His flight boarded in 35 minutes. If he argued, if he asked for a supervisor, if he did anything except submit, he'd miss it. And missing it meant missing the London meeting. and missing the London meeting meant losing the Boeing deal. And losing the Boeing deal meant watching his competitors laugh while Skylink Aviation became a cautionary tale about overreach. So Marcus submitted. He stood there in his socks while the female agent patted down his arms, his torso, his legs, while other passengers walked through the regular line with barely a glance. While a white man in an actual tracksuit, the kind that screamed, "I just rolled out of bed," sailed through pre-check without even taking off his shoes. When it was over, when Marcus had retied his sneakers and rethreaded his belt and repocketed his gum, Agent Williams handed him his boarding pass with a smile that wasn't a smile. "People like you should know better than to try to hide things." Marcus took the pass without responding, but the words landed like they were meant to. People like you. Not travelers, not passengers, not citizens. People like you. He walked toward his gate with his jaw clenched and his hands steady. Behind him, he heard Williams laugh about something with another agent. He didn't look back. The gate area was crowded, mostly business travelers in expensive casual wear, the kind of people who flew first class often enough that it didn't register as luxury anymore. Marcus found a seat near the window, pulled out his laptop, and opened the presentation deck for the London meeting. Revenue projections, fleet expansion timelines, customer satisfaction metrics, all the numbers that prove Skylink wasn't just viable but dominant. All the evidence that Marcus Thompson wasn't a diversity hire or a lucky upstart, but the CEO of a $2 billion company. His phone buzzed. Text from his CFO. "Board wants confirmation your wheel's up on time. British Airways VP getting nervous." Marcus typed back, "Boarding in 20 minutes. I'll close it." He didn't mention the check-in delay or the TSA screening. He didn't mention the way his shoulders were tight and his chest was heavy. He'd learned not to burden his team with things they couldn't fix. They had enough to worry about keeping investors calm and competitors at bay. They didn't need to know that their CEO still got treated like a suspect every time he tried to fly. The gate agent's voice crackled over the speaker. "Pre-boarding for passengers needing extra time, families with small children, and our first-class and business-class customers." Marcus stood, boarding pass in hand. He was 6'1", athletic build maintained by morning runs and hotel gym sessions, but he moved carefully in crowds. No sudden gestures, no aggressive posture, just smooth, unthreatening motion designed to make him as invisible as possible. The gate agent was a woman in her 40s, blonde hair in a tight bun, lipstick the color of arterial blood. Her name tag said Monica Stevens. She glanced at Marcus's boarding pass as he approached, then looked up at his face, then back down at the pass. The scanner beeped green. She didn't hand it back. "Just need to verify this quickly, sir. It's already been verified. At check-in. And security." Monica Stevens smiled, but her eyes stayed cold. "Just doing my job, sir." One moment. She picked up the gate phone, spoke quietly to someone, hung up, handed Marcus his pass. "Thank you for your patience." Marcus walked down the jet bridge without responding. 3 strikes already, and he hadn't even boarded the plane. But he kept his breathing even, his expression neutral. Let them make the mistake, let them show who they are. The aircraft smelled like new leather and recycled air. First class split into 2 rows of 4 seats, 2 on each side of the aisle. Seat 1A was window left, the best seat on the plane, the one Marcus always booked when he flew commercial. He stowed his duffel in the overhead bin, settled into the seat, and buckled his seatbelt with a soft click that felt like punctuation. For about 90 seconds, he thought maybe the day would get better. Then Patricia Hendricks appeared. She was 54, 28 years with the airline, and she carried her authority like a shield. Silver hair pulled back so tight it lifted her eyebrows, navy uniform pressed to knife edges, smile that looked painted on. She stopped at Marcus's row, glanced down at him, and her smile froze. "Good morning. Welcome aboard." "Morning." Marcus pulled out his tablet, opening his presentation files. Patricia Hendricks didn't move. She was doing the calculation, the same one the check-in agent and the TSA screeners and the gate agent had done. Young black man, expensive seat, something doesn't match. Marcus felt her stare like weight on his shoulders. Can I get you something to drink before we take off? Water's fine, thanks. She walked away, but not far, just to the galley where another flight attendant waited. Younger, maybe late 20s, with kind eyes that looked like they wanted to apologize for things that weren't her fault. Marcus heard them whisper, couldn't make out words, but caught the tone. Concern, confusion. The younger one glanced his way, then looked down at her tablet. 2 minutes later, Patricia Hendricks returned. She stood in the aisle next to seat 1A, arms crossed, posture rigid. Sir, I'm going to need to see your boarding pass again. Marcus looked up from his tablet. You scanned it at the door when I boarded. I know, but I need to verify seat assignment. He pulled the pass from his pocket, handed it to her. She studied it like it was written in a foreign language. Pulled out her own tablet, scrolled through screens, frowned. There seems to be some kind of error in the system. This seat may have been double booked. It wasn't double booked at check-in, or security, or the gate. Nevertheless, we need to confirm. Would you mind stepping out into the aisle while I sort this out? Marcus didn't move. I paid $4,200 for this seat. I have a printed boarding pass and a confirmation email. There's no error. Patricia Hendricks' smile vanished. Sir, I'm asking you politely to step into the aisle so we can resolve this. And I'm telling you politely that I'm not moving until you show me written documentation that my seat is actually unavailable. The cabin had gone quiet. Other first-class passengers pretended not to watch. But Marcus could feel their attention like heat. The younger flight attendant, Emily Carson, according to her name tag, shifted her weight nervously near the galley. Patricia Hendricks leaned closer, voice dropping to something that tried to sound professional, but landed somewhere near contempt. Sir, I've been doing this job for 28 years. I know when something doesn't look right, and this doesn't look right. What doesn't look right? My ticket, my ID, or me? The question hung in the air like smoke. Patricia Hendricks straightened, face flushing. Don't put words in my mouth. I'm not. I'm asking a direct question. What specifically about my presence in this seat doesn't look right to you? Before she could answer, a man appeared from behind the cockpit curtain. Late 50s, silver hair, captain's uniform with 4 stripes on the shoulders, the kind of bearing that said he'd been flying since before Marcus was born. His name tag read Captain Davis Wilson. He'd been a pilot for 35 years, had logged over 20,000 flight hours, and he walked into the first-class cabin like he owned it. What's the problem here? Patricia Hendricks turned to him, relief flooding her face. Captain, we have a seating discrepancy. This passenger is claiming seat 1A, but I believe there may have been a system error. Captain Wilson didn't look at Marcus's boarding pass, didn't ask to see his ID or confirmation email. Just looked at Marcus himself, taking in the hoodie and the sneakers and the skin color, and made a decision. Sir, I'm going to need you to cooperate with my crew. If there's a seating issue, we'll resolve it. But you need to step into the aisle so we can verify the manifest. I've already verified it multiple times. My seat assignment is correct. Captain Wilson's jaw tightened. On my aircraft, I am the final authority. If my crew has concerns about seating, we address them. Now I'm asking you nicely, step into the aisle. Marcus felt his heartbeat in his temples steady and hard. This was the moment he could stand up, could move, could let them shuffle him to economy or off the plane entirely, could swallow the humiliation one more time and tell himself it wasn't worth fighting. He'd done it before, dozens of times, hundreds maybe. Smiled through the indignity, stayed calm, let them make the mistake but never made them face the consequence. But something in him cracked. Not loud, not violent, just a quiet fracture, like ice giving way under too much weight. No. Captain Wilson blinked. Excuse me? No, I'm not moving. This is my seat. I have documentation proving it's my seat. If you have documentation proving otherwise, show it to me. But I'm not moving based on your crew's vague concerns about how things look. The captain's face went red. Sir, I'm giving you a direct order. Stand up and step into the aisle, or I will have you removed from this aircraft. For what violation? What rule have I broken? What policy have I violated? You're disrupting the boarding process and refusing to comply with crew instructions. I'm sitting in my assigned seat. The only disruption is your crew questioning my right to be here without cause. From somewhere behind Marcus, a voice cut through the tension. A white man, early 60s, expensive suit, the kind of face that screamed Wall Street and country clubs. He stood in the aisle near seat 1C, leather briefcase in hand, irritation radiating off him like cologne. Is there a problem? I always sit in 1A on this route. Is this passenger in my seat? Robert Whitmore. Investment banker, portfolio worth somewhere north of 50 million. And the kind of man who expected the world to rearrange itself around his comfort. He looked at Marcus the way someone looks at a stranger in their parking spot. Patricia Hendricks latched onto him like a life raft. Mr. Whitmore, I apologize for the confusion. We're trying to sort out a seating issue. Whitmore frowned. I have platinum status. I specifically requested 1A when I booked. Captain Wilson glanced at Patricia, who shook her head slightly. The manifest said Marcus Thompson, seat 1A, confirmation number valid. But Whitmore was a known quantity, a familiar face, someone who fit the picture of what first class was supposed to look like. The captain made a decision. Sir, he said to Marcus, his voice harder now, I'm going to ask you one more time. Move to the aisle or I'm calling security. Marcus felt something cold settle in his chest. This was it, the line. He could cross it or step back from it, but he couldn't stand on it anymore. Then call security, because I'm not moving. The cabin went silent. Even the boarding passengers behind them stopped, sensing the shift from inconvenience to incident. Emily Carson gripped her tablet tighter, knuckles white. Robert Whitmore shook his head with the disgusted certainty of a man who knew exactly what was happening and approved. Patricia Hendricks pulled out her radio. Security to Gate 12, we have a non-compliant passenger refusing to deplane. Marcus sat very still, his mother's voice in his head. Stay calm, baby. Let them show who they are. Captain Wilson leaned down, close enough that Marcus could smell coffee on his breath. You're making a big mistake. I don't think I am. The captain straightened. We'll see. 2 minutes passed, then 3. Passengers filed past, moving to economy, eyes sliding over Marcus like he was an exhibit in a museum. Some looked sympathetic. Most looked uncomfortable. A few looked angry, like Marcus was personally inconveniencing them by refusing to disappear. In seat 3C, a young black man named Jordan Mitchell pulled out his phone. He was 28, worked as a data analyst for a tech firm in Seattle, and he'd watched his mother get pulled off a bus once for asking why she had to move to the back. He'd been 7 then. 21 years later, watching Marcus Thompson sit calmly in seat 1A while a flight attendant radioed security, Jordan felt that same sick weight in his stomach. He opened his camera app, started recording. The security officers arrived 6 minutes after Patricia's call. 2 of them, both white, both armed, both with the kind of swagger that came from wearing a uniform in a space where your authority was absolute. Officer Blake was 35, former military, the kind of cop who thought every interaction was a test of dominance. Officer Harris was 41, 14 years on the job, and he looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with the early hour. What's the situation? Blake asked, hand resting on his belt near his radio. Captain Wilson stepped forward. This passenger is refusing to comply with crew instructions regarding a seating discrepancy. Blake looked at Marcus. Sir, I need you to step out of the seat and come with us. Marcus kept his voice level, hands visible on the armrests. I'd like to know what rule or regulation I violated that warrants removal. You've been asked to move by the flight crew. That's enough. Asked to move without cause. I have a valid ticket for this seat. No one has provided documentation to the contrary. Blake's jaw tightened. Sir, you can walk with us voluntarily or we can escalate this. Your choice. Marcus looked at him, at Patricia Hendricks, at Captain Wilson, at Robert Whitmore watching from the aisle with barely concealed satisfaction. He thought about the check-in agent and the TSA screener and the gate agent. He thought about 39 years of people like you and standard procedure, and does he look like he belongs here? He thought about his mother's voice. Let them show who they are. I'll leave voluntarily if you show me written policy that I've violated. Otherwise, I'm exercising my right to remain in the seat I purchased. Blake stepped closer. Stand up. Now. Am I under arrest? You will be if you don't comply. For what crime? Blake didn't answer. He grabbed Marcus's arm. Marcus didn't resist, didn't pull away, didn't raise his voice, but he didn't stand either. Blake pulled harder. Marcus's body stayed loose, non-combative, but his weight remained settled in the seat. Officer Harris moved to the other side, reaching for Marcus's other arm. Don't touch me, Marcus said quietly. I'll walk. Just don't put your hands on me. Too late. Blake yanked Marcus forward, pulling him half out of the seat. Harris grabbed his other arm. Together they lifted Marcus to his feet, and in that motion Blake twisted Marcus's left arm behind his back. The handcuffs came out. Marcus felt the metal close around his wrists, felt the ratchet click tight, felt the plastic bite into skin. Too tight, cutting off circulation. His fingers started to tingle. The cuffs are too tight. I need medical attention. Blake ignored him, started walking Marcus toward the aircraft door, hand gripping the back of Marcus's neck like he was a suspect fleeing a crime scene. Marcus didn't fight, but his feet dragged slightly, instinctive resistance, and Blake took it as defiance. He shoved Marcus forward. Marcus stumbled. His shoulder hit the seat back at 1C. Robert Whitmore jerked away like Marcus was contagious. Blake pushed again, harder, and Marcus's head snapped forward, temple connecting with the armrest of the aisle seat. Pain exploded bright and sharp. Marcus tasted copper, felt warmth on his temple, knew without seeing that he was bleeding. The cabin erupted in gasps. Phones lifted everywhere, dozens of them recording from every angle. Blake didn't slow down. He dragged Marcus down the aisle, blood dripping onto the carpet, past rows of passengers who pressed themselves against seatbacks to make room. Emily Carson covered her mouth. Patricia Hendricks watched with her arms crossed, expression unreadable. Captain Wilson followed them to the door, then stopped. He didn't watch them drag Marcus through the jet bridge. Didn't see Marcus's head hang forward, vision blurring. Didn't see the smear of blood on the first-class carpet. He turned back to the cabin, looked at the passengers still filming. Put your phones away. We'll be departing shortly. In the terminal, Blake and Harris marched Marcus through crowds of travelers. People stared. Some whispered. A child asked his mother why that man was bleeding. The mother shushed him and looked away. They put Marcus in a holding cell near the security checkpoint. White cinder block walls, metal bench, fluorescent lights that hummed like insects. Blake unlocked one cuff, locked it to a rail on the bench. Left Marcus half sitting, half leaning, blood drying on his temple. Someone will be here to process you shortly. Marcus didn't respond. He was thinking about his phone still in his pocket, thinking about the call he needed to make, thinking about the 8 minutes that were about to change everything. Blake and Harris walked away. The door closed with a hollow metal sound. Marcus was alone. He sat there for 60 seconds, getting his breathing under control. The pain in his head had settled into a dull throb. The handcuffs had gone from uncomfortable to agonizing, metal cutting deep enough that he could feel his pulse against the restraint. Then he stood, awkward, with one hand locked to the rail, and pulled his phone from his pocket with his free hand. His fingers shook slightly as he scrolled through contacts. found the name he needed. Hit call. 3 rings. Then a voice, professional and alert despite the early hour. Skylink Aviation, chairman's office. Marcus's voice came out steady, calm, like he was ordering coffee instead of ending careers. This is Marcus Thompson. I need you to patch me through to Richard Garrett immediately. Mr. Thompson, is everything all right? No, but it will be. Get me Garrett, now. Hold, please. 15 seconds of silence. Then a new voice, older, gravelly with authority and concern. Marcus? What's wrong? Richard Garrett, 71 years old, founder of Garrett Capital Management, chairman of Skylink Aviation's board, and the man who'd believed in Marcus when no one else would. He'd put $30 million into Skylink when it was just a pitch deck and a dream. He'd defended Marcus through investor revolts and market crashes. And right now, he was the only person Marcus knew who could make one phone call and stop the world from spinning. Richard, Marcus said quietly, I need you to ground Flight 447, American Airlines, Atlanta to London, right now. What? Why? Because I'm sitting in an airport holding cell with handcuffs on and blood on my face. Because they pulled me off that flight for sitting in my seat while black. And because if that plane takes off before I'm back on it, I'm pulling our code-share agreement with American and taking $400 million of partnership revenue with me. Silence. Then, Jesus Christ, are you hurt? I'll live. But I need that plane grounded, Richard. I need it back at the gate in 10 minutes, and I need whoever runs American to understand that this isn't a request. Consider it done. The line went dead. Marcus sat back down on the bench, phone still in his hand. His heart was pounding now, adrenaline catching up to him, but his face stayed calm, almost peaceful, because he knew what was coming. 8 minutes later, Captain Davis Wilson was going through his pre-flight checklist when the tower came through his headset. Flight 447, hold position, do not taxi, repeat, hold position. Wilson frowned. Tower, this is Flight 447, we're cleared for pushback. What's the issue? CEO priority order. Return to gate immediately. What? We haven't even left the gate yet. What CEO order? The tower controller's voice carried an edge of panic Wilson had never heard before. Sir, I have Atlanta Airport Director on the line. He says to tell you this comes from CEO Diaz herself and it's non-negotiable. Return to gate, ground all passengers, hold the aircraft. In the cabin, Patricia Hendricks heard the captain's confusion over the intercom, saw him emerge from the cockpit face pale. Something's wrong, he muttered. Outside, through the windows, passengers started pointing. 3 black SUVs were pulling up to the gate. Not airport vehicles, private cars, behind them 2 vans with network news logos. Emily Carson gripped Patricia's arm. What's happening? Patricia didn't answer, but for the first time in 28 years, she looked afraid. In the holding cell, Marcus heard footfalls in the corridor. Multiple people moving fast. The door swung open. An airport director in a suit that cost more than Officer Blake made in a month. Behind him, 2 men in dark jackets with the letters FAA visible on their badges. Behind them, a woman Marcus recognized from industry conferences, Rachel Diaz, CEO of American Airlines, looking like she'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. Mr. Thompson, the airport director started, his voice shaking slightly. I am so deeply sorry. Marcus looked at him, looked at the FAA agents, looked at Rachel Diaz, who couldn't meet his eyes. Then he held up his hand, the one still cuffed to the bench. Someone want to get these off me? An FAA agent rushed forward with a key. The cuffs came off. Marcus rubbed his wrists, red marks already darkening to bruises. Rachel Diaz stepped forward. Mr. Thompson, I've ordered Flight 447 to remain at the gate. Your seat is being held. We're prepared to. Marcus stood. He was taller than all of them, and in that moment he felt every inch of it. Get me to that aircraft, he said quietly. Now. They walked through the terminal like a funeral procession. Marcus in his blood-stained hoodie, flanked by airline executives and federal agents. Passengers parting like water. Some recognized him. Most didn't. But everyone felt the weight of whatever was happening. When they reached Gate A12, the jet bridge was crowded. More executives, airport police commanders, and standing off to the side, looking like he wished he could dissolve into the walls, Officer Blake. Marcus stopped in front of him. Blake couldn't meet his eyes. "You hurt me," Marcus said. "You bled me. You humiliated me in front of 200 people, and you did it because you saw a black man in a hoodie and assumed I didn't belong." Blake's throat worked. "Sir, Marcus held up a hand. "Save it. You'll have plenty of time to explain it to a judge." He walked past into the jet bridge, Rachel Diaz and the airport director scrambling to keep up. "Mr. Thompson," Diaz was saying, "we're prepared to offer." Marcus stopped, turned, looked at her with eyes that had gone very, very cold. "I don't want your settlement. I don't want your apology. I want every person responsible for what happened today held accountable. And I want it public." Diaz swallowed. "Of course. Whatever you need." "Good, because I'm about to walk back onto that aircraft, and when I do, I'm going to explain to 200 witnesses exactly who I am and exactly what they just watched happen." He walked down the jet bridge alone. The cabin had gone silent, every passenger still seated, phones still out, waiting. Patricia Hendricks stood near the galley, face white. Captain Wilson emerged from the cockpit, confusion and dawning horror mixing in his expression. Marcus stepped through the door, blood still on his temple, hoodie still rumpled, but his spine was straight and his voice carried to every corner of the cabin when he spoke. "My name is Marcus Thompson. I am the founder and CEO of Skylink Aviation. I own 34% of a $2 billion company. Your airline has a code-share partnership with my company worth $400 million annually." Silence. Absolute. Suffocating. 20 minutes ago, I was dragged from seat 1A because my skin color didn't match what your crew thought first class should look like. I was handcuffed. I was bleeding. I was humiliated. And every single one of you filmed it. He looked at Patricia Hendricks. "You're fired." He looked at Captain Wilson. "You're grounded. Permanently." He looked at Robert Whitmore, still standing in the aisle, face frozen in shock. "And you'll be hearing from my lawyers." Then Marcus walked to seat 1A and was down, buckled his seatbelt, pulled out his tablet like nothing had happened. The cabin stayed silent, but every phone was still recording. Outside, Officer Blake was being escorted away by his own commanders. Patricia Hendricks was crying in the galley, Emily Carson's arm around her shoulders. Captain Wilson was handing his badge to an FAA agent. And in seat 3C, Jordan Mitchell stopped recording. 53 minutes of footage, clear audio, perfect lighting. He uploaded it before the plane even pushed back. By the time Flight 447 reached cruising altitude, the video had 500,000 views. By the time it landed in London, it had 15 million. And Marcus Thompson, sitting in seat 1A with a bandage on his temple and his presentation deck open on his tablet, was already planning his next move. Because this wasn't over. This was just beginning. The video hit Twitter at 37,000 feet. Jordan Mitchell uploaded it with 3 words, "Watch until the end." No context, no hashtags, no explanation needed. The algorithm did what algorithms do when they smell blood in the water. 17 minutes later, a CNN producer in Washington saw it in her feed. She watched the first 10 seconds, grabbed her phone, called the assignment desk. 30 seconds after that, CNN's breaking news banner went live. Black CEO dragged from first-class seat after crew questions his ticket. Marcus didn't know any of this yet. He was reading revenue projections over the Atlantic, trying to focus on numbers while his temple throbbed and his wrists ached where the handcuffs had bitten. The British Airways 5P was waiting in London. The Boeing deal needed his signature by Friday. Everything that mattered was still ahead of him, but behind him, the world was catching fire. By the time Flight 447 crossed into international airspace, the video had 2 million views. By the time the captain announced their descent into Heathrow, it had 8 million. By the time Marcus cleared customs and stepped into the arrivals hall, his phone had been vibrating non-stop for 40 minutes with notifications he hadn't checked. He pulled it out while waiting for his Uber. 87 missed calls, 214 text messages, 391 emails. His CFO, his board, his investors, his family, journalists he'd never heard of, activists he'd met once at conferences, and strangers who'd somehow gotten his personal number and wanted to tell him they were praying for him, or that he was overreacting, or that he should sue everyone, or that this was all his fault for not just moving. The top email was from Richard Garrett, sent 12 minutes ago. "Call me immediately. Board emergency session in progress." Marcus dialed. Garrett picked up before the first ring finished. "Where are you?" "London. Just landed." "Good. Don't talk to anyone. CNN, Fox, MSNBC, they all have your number now. Bloomberg's running a profile. The New York Times legal desk is trying to reach our general counsel, and American Airlines stock dropped 4% in the last hour." Marcus stepped outside into gray London drizzle, phone pressed to his ear. 4%? Garrett's voice carried something Marcus rarely heard from him. Excitement wrapped in concern. "The video's everywhere, Marcus, everywhere. I've had 3 senators call me asking if we need federal intervention. The FAA's opening an investigation, and American's CEO is reportedly in crisis management meetings trying to figure out how to contain this." Good. They should be scared. They are. But so are some of our investors. I've got 2 board members asking if you're going to make this a media circus instead of a business negotiation. They're worried about Skylink's reputation getting tangled up in a racial discrimination lawsuit. Marcus felt something cold settle behind his sternum. "Let me be clear, Richard. I'm not making this a circus. I'm making this public. There's a difference." "I agree, but we need to be smart about how we proceed. The Boeing deal is still happening. I'll sign it Friday morning like we planned. But I'm not staying quiet about what happened just to make white investors comfortable." Silence on the other end. Then Garrett exhaled. "I wouldn't ask you to, but I need you to know what you're walking into. This isn't just about you anymore. Every black executive in America is watching. Every airline is watching. Every corporation that's ever dealt with a discrimination complaint is watching. Whatever you do next sets a precedent. Then let's make sure it's the right one." The Uber arrived, sleek black Mercedes that smelled like new leather and air freshener. Marcus gave the driver the hotel address and settled into the back seat. Through the rain-streaked window, London looked like every other city when you're exhausted and angry and trying not to think about how much your head hurts. His phone buzzed again. Text from his younger sister, Jasmine, a civil rights attorney in Chicago. "Just saw the video. Are you okay? Call me when you can. Don't sign anything without a lawyer." Another from his CFO, David Chen. "British Airways VP wants to reschedule tomorrow's meeting, says you should take time to recover. I think he's nervous about being associated with controversy." Marcus typed back to David. "Tell him we meet as planned or the deal's off. I'm not hiding." Then to Jasmine. "I'm fine. Heading to hotel now. We'll call later." He wasn't fine. His wrists were swelling, purple bruises blooming where the handcuffs had crushed capillaries. His temple had stopped bleeding, but the skin felt tight and hot. Probably needed stitches, but he'd settle for butterfly bandages and concealer. His whole body felt like one giant bruise, the kind that doesn't show up until hours later when adrenaline wears off and you realize how much damage was done. But being fine wasn't the point. The point was not giving anyone an excuse to dismiss what happened. If he showed weakness, they'd focus on that instead of the systemic rot that put him in handcuffs in the first place. The hotel was expensive in that understated European way. All dark wood and soft lighting and staff who pretended not to notice the dried blood on his temple. Marcus checked in with his passport and a credit card, declined help with his single duffel bag, took the elevator to the 8th floor and locked himself in a room that cost £900 a night and felt exactly like every other hotel room he'd ever stayed in. He dropped the duffel, sat on the edge of the bed, and finally let himself feel it. The humiliation, the rage, the exhaustion, not just from today but from every day like today that had come before it. Every time he'd swallowed his anger to keep a business deal alive. Every time he'd smiled through suspicion to prove he wasn't a threat. Every time he'd made himself smaller, quieter, less intimidating so white people would feel safe enough to treat him like a human being. He was so tired of being accommodating. His phone rang. Unknown number, New York area code. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. Mr. Thompson? This is Elena Rodriguez from the New York Times. I'm working on a story about your experience on Flight 447. Do you have time for a few questions? Marcus's first instinct was to hang up. His second was to unleash everything he was feeling and let her print every word. His third, the one he listened to, was to be strategic. I'm not ready to give interviews yet, but I will be. When I am, I'll make a public statement. You'll have access when that happens. Can you at least confirm the basic facts? You were removed from. I can confirm that I was violently removed from a seat I paid for after being racially profiled by airline crew. Everything else will come out in due time. Are you planning to sue? I'm planning to make sure this never happens to anyone else. How I do that is still being determined. He hung up before she could ask another question. Immediately the phone rang again. Different number, same area code. He turned it off completely, tossed it on the nightstand, and walked to the bathroom. The mirror showed him what he already knew. Blood crusted at his temple, bruise spreading purple and yellow beneath it. Eyes bloodshot from exhaustion and stress, face that looked 10 years older than it had this morning. He looked like a victim, and he hated it. Hated that the narrative would be about what was done to him instead of about the system that allowed it to happen. He washed his face carefully, wincing when water hit the cut. Found the first aid kit the hotel provided, cleaned the wound with alcohol that stung like vindication, applied butterfly bandages that pulled the skin tight, took 4 ibuprofen and chased them with water from the tap that tasted like minerals in European plumbing. When he came out of the bathroom, someone was knocking on his door. Marcus froze. No one knew his room number. He'd checked in under his company name, not his personal information. The knocking came again, firm but not aggressive. Mr. Thompson? It's James Barrett. Richard Garrett gave me your location. I apologize for the intrusion, but I think we need to talk. James Barrett. Marcus knew the name. Venture capitalist, 49 years old, made his fortune in early tech investments, now ran a fund that focused on minority-owned businesses. They'd met once at a conference, shook hands, exchanged business cards that Marcus assumed went into a drawer and got forgotten. He opened the door. Barrett stood in the hallway looking exactly like his LinkedIn photo. Fit, silver hair, expensive casual clothes that probably cost more than Marcus's bloody hoodie but looked equally unimpressive. He held a leather portfolio and an expression of genuine concern. I saw the video. I got on a plane 2 hours ago. I needed to talk to you in person. Marcus stepped aside, let him in. Barrett set the portfolio on the desk, turned to face Marcus, and his eyes went to the bandage on Marcus's temple. Jesus. Are you all right? I'll heal. Why are you here? Barrett pulled out his phone, opened it to a news article, handed it to Marcus. The headline read, Venture capitalist James Barrett calls for industry-wide audit of airline discrimination practices. The article was 20 minutes old. I released a statement an hour ago. Pledged $20 million to establish an independent review board for discrimination complaints in the aviation industry. Called on every airline CEO to implement mandatory bias training and third-party oversight. And I specifically named American Airlines as an example of systemic failure. Marcus looked up from the phone. Why? Because I'm tired of watching talented people get destroyed by casual racism while the companies responsible issue empty apologies and move on. Because I've got capital and influence, and if I don't use them for something that matters, what's the point? And because you're not the first, Marcus, you're just the first one with enough power to fight back. He pulled out a tablet from his portfolio, opened a folder, showed Marcus a spreadsheet. Names, dates, airlines, outcomes, 47 incidents in the past 5 years, all involving passengers of color, all involving first-class seating disputes or crew challenges, all resolved with settlements and non-disclosure agreements. I've been tracking this for 2 years, ever since a friend of mine, brilliant surgeon, black woman, got pulled off a United flight because a flight attendant didn't believe she was a doctor. She settled quietly, signed an NDA, took the money and tried to forget it happened, but it kept happening. To other people, over and over, same pattern, same results. Marcus scrolled through the list, some of the names he recognized, most he didn't, but the pattern was unmistakable, and in the outcome column, every single entry said the same thing: settled, NDA, no admission of wrongdoing. Americans going to offer you money, Barrett continued. A lot of it, 7 figures probably, plus first-class status for life, public apology, maybe some donations to racial justice organizations. And they'll ask you to sign an NDA, to move on quietly, to let them fix it internally. Marcus closed the tablet. I'm not signing anything. Good, because that's exactly what they're counting on. They're banking on you being tired, being hurt, being ready to take the money and disappear. But if you refuse, if you take this public and demand real accountability, you'll change the entire industry. Or I'll destroy my company's relationship with every major airline and become too controversial for investors to touch. Barrett smiled, but it wasn't warm. It was the smile of someone who'd fought these battles before and knew the cost. Possibly. But you'll also force every airline in America to examine their policies. You'll empower every person who's ever been profiled to speak up. And you'll prove that power doesn't mean you have to stay silent. Marcus walked to the window, looked out at London rain. What are you asking me to do? I'm asking you to let me help. I've got a legal team that specializes in civil rights cases. I've got media contacts who can tell your story without turning it into entertainment. I've got board connections at 6 major airlines who are already nervous about their own liability. And I've got the capital to make sure you don't lose business relationships because you chose principle over profit. And what do you get out of this? The satisfaction of watching Patricia Hendricks and Captain Wilson face actual consequences instead of early retirement with pensions. The chance to build something permanent out of this moment. And maybe if we do it right, an investment opportunity in Skylink once you're not buried in legal battles. Marcus turned from the window. You want to invest in my company? I want to invest in the future you're about to create. But first, we need to make sure you survive the present. Someone else knocked on the door. Marcus and Barrett exchanged glances. Marcus opened it to find Emily Carson standing in the hallway, still in her flight attendant uniform, eyes red from crying, hands shaking as she gripped her purse. Mr. Thompson, I'm so sorry to bother you. I know I have no right to be here, but I need to talk to you. Marcus stared at her. This was the woman who'd stood in the galley while Patricia Hendricks called security, who'd watched him get dragged bleeding down the aisle and said nothing, who'd been complicit through silence. How did you find me? I followed you from the airport. I called in sick for the return flight. I couldn't get back on that plane. Not after what I saw. Not after what I didn't do. Barrett stepped forward. Maybe we should let her speak. Marcus didn't move from the doorway. You've got 2 minutes. Emily's voice cracked. I have emails, 12 years of emails, complaints about Patricia that HR buried, incidents with Captain Wilson that got dismissed. Policies from Regional Manager Gerald Foster that are discriminatory even if they don't say it explicitly. I've been keeping them because I knew something like this would happen eventually. I just never had the courage to do anything about it. She pulled out her phone, hands still shaking. I just sent everything to the FAA, to the Department of Justice, to CNN, to your attorney if you have one. I'm blowing the whistle on all of it, and I know it won't undo what happened to you. I know it doesn't make me brave or good, but I can't be silent anymore. Marcus studied her face. She meant it. He could see the terror and determination warring behind her eyes. She was throwing away her career, possibly facing retaliation, definitely burning bridges that could never be rebuilt. For what? Guilt? Conscience? The desperate need to be on the right side of a story that had already gone viral? Does America know you're here? No, and they will soon. I'm sure they're tracking my phone. I don't care. Barrett pulled out a business card, handed it to Emily. You're going to need a lawyer. Call this number. Tell them I sent you. They'll protect you. Emily took the card, but her eyes stayed on Marcus. I don't expect forgiveness, Mr. Thompson. I just needed you to know that I see you. I saw you then. I should have said something then. I'm saying it now. Marcus's jaw tightened. You're right. You should have said something then, when it would have mattered, when it could have stopped them. I know, but you're saying it now, and that's more than most people do. He stepped aside, let her into the room. She sat on the edge of the desk chair, still gripping her purse like a life preserver. Barrett closed the door. Tell us everything. Emily started talking about Patricia Hendricks's 28-year career built on small cruelties and racial suspicion, about Captain Wilson's refusal to ever second-guess his crew, even when passengers filed formal complaints, about Gerald Foster's passenger experience guidelines that used coded language like brand consistency and demographic alignment to justify profiling, about the 47 incidents that weren't accidents or isolated events, but the inevitable result of a system designed to exclude. She pulled up emails on her phone, screenshots of HR responses that dismissed complaints as misunderstandings or miscommunications, documentation of settlement offers tied to NDAs, internal memos about managing optics during discrimination investigations. Barrett was recording everything on his tablet, fingers flying across the screen. This is enough to trigger a federal investigation. Civil rights violations, conspiracy to deprive rights under color of authority, possibly RICO if we can prove systematic cover-up across multiple incidents. Marcus watched Emily talk, saw the weight lifting off her shoulders with every word. She'd been carrying this for years, watching colleagues get away with behavior she knew was wrong, telling herself it wasn't her place to speak up. Until today, when silence became impossible. Why now? Marcus asked when she paused for breath. Why not after the first incident, or the 10th? Emily's eyes filled with tears again. Because I was scared. Because I needed this job. Because I told myself it wasn't my fight. Because I'm a coward who chose comfort over courage until the world was watching and I couldn't hide anymore. She wasn't wrong, but Marcus recognized the pattern, the same pattern that kept systems of oppression running smoothly. Good people who said nothing, who looked away, who waited until it was safe to be brave. Your emails help. Your testimony helps. But you don't get absolution from me. You get to live with what you didn't do when it mattered. Emily nodded, wiping her eyes. I know. I just wanted you to know I'm sorry, and I'm going to spend however long it takes making sure this doesn't happen again. After she left, Barrett and Marcus sat in silence for a long moment. Outside, London rain kept falling. Inside, Marcus felt the weight of decisions pressing down on him. Barrett spoke first. American will make their offer tomorrow. Probably through intermediaries. They'll try to separate the financial settlement from the systemic reforms, make you choose between personal justice and institutional change. I want both. Then we need to move fast. I'll have my legal team draft demands before American can control the narrative. Full disclosure of all discrimination complaints. Independent audit of crew training programs. Mandatory reporting to federal oversight. And criminal charges for everyone involved in your assault. Marcus thought about Patricia Hendricks crying in the galley. About Captain Wilson handing over his badge. About Officer Blake being escorted away. He felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not vindication. Just cold certainty that consequences mattered more than apologies. I want their names public. I want their careers over. I want every person who enabled this to understand that silence has a price. Barrett nodded. Then that's what we'll get. Marcus's phone, still turned off, sat on the nightstand. When he powered it back on, 300 new notifications flooded the screen. But one voicemail stood out, left 20 minutes ago from a number he didn't recognize but a name he did. Dr. Jamal Wilson. The message was short. Mr. Thompson, you don't know me, but Patricia Hendricks knows me. In 2018, she did to me exactly what she did to you. I settled. I signed an NDA. I've regretted it every day since. If you're willing to fight this publicly, I'll break my NDA and testify. I don't care what it costs me. This has to stop. Marcus played the message 3 times. Then he called back. Dr. Wilson answered on the first ring. You got my message. I did. Tell me what happened. For the next 30 minutes, Dr. Wilson laid out a story that could have been Marcus's story, except it ended differently. First-class ticket to a medical conference. Patricia Hendricks questioning his seat assignment. Captain Wilson backing her up without checking facts. But Dr. Wilson, younger then and less established, had agreed to move, had filed a complaint afterward, had been offered $50,000 and a non-disclosure agreement, had taken it because he had student loans and a mortgage and a career to protect. I told myself it was the smart choice, that fighting would cost more than it was worth. But I've watched the video of what they did to you, and all I can think about is how many other people they've done this to because I stayed quiet. Marcus wrote Dr. Wilson's name on the hotel notepad, added it to the list. You're willing to testify publicly, even though it violates your NDA? I'm willing to go to prison for contempt if that's what it takes. I'm a cardiothoracic surgeon, Mr. Thompson. I hold human hearts in my hands, and I let a flight attendant make me feel like I didn't deserve to sit in a chair I paid for. I'm done being afraid. Stand by. My legal team will contact you within 24 hours. After they hung up, Marcus called Barrett back. We've got our first corroborating victim, and he's willing to break his NDA. Barrett's voice carried grim satisfaction. Good, we'll need more. I'm betting there are at least a dozen others out there who'll come forward once they see someone else going first. He was right. By morning, Marcus had messages from 6 more people. A tech executive named Linda Morrison who'd been accused of having a fraudulent upgrade in 2020. A professor, David Rodriguez, who'd been removed for suspicious behavior that turned out to be reading a book in Spanish. A teenage girl who'd been flying alone to visit her grandmother and was questioned for 20 minutes about whether her first-class ticket was real. Each story followed the same pattern: suspicion, escalation, humiliation, settlement, silence. But the silence was breaking. Barrett's legal team worked through the night London time, morning in New York. By the time Marcus woke up Thursday, they had a 40-page filing ready for federal court. Civil rights violations against American Airlines, Patricia Hendricks, Captain Davis Wilson, Officer Blake, and Gerald Foster. Punitive damages, injunctive relief, and a demand for full transparency in all discrimination-related settlements going back 10 years. They also had something else. Interest from 3 major law firms offering to take the case pro bono for the publicity value. Barrett had turned them all down. We're paying full rate. he'd told Marcus. This isn't a charity case. This is a business transaction. You're purchasing accountability. Thursday afternoon, American Airlines made their move. Marcus was in a conference room at the British Airways headquarters, signing documents that finalized the Boeing deal when his phone lit up with a call from a lawyer he'd never heard of representing American's crisis management team. He let it go to voicemail, finished signing his name with a fountain pen that cost more than the handcuffs that had bruised his wrists, and shook hands with executives who'd watched the video and now looked at him with a mixture of respect and fear. The British Airways 5P, a white man in his 60s with an accent that screamed Cambridge and old money, leaned in as they walked out. That business with American. Dreadful. Absolutely dreadful. You handled it with remarkable grace. Marcus wanted to laugh. Grace. As if grace was something he'd chosen instead of something he'd learned to perform to survive. As if staying calm while being assaulted was a virtue instead of a survival mechanism. Thank you. I'm hopeful it will lead to meaningful change. Quite. Well, you have our full support. We've actually begun reviewing our own protocols. Can't be too careful these days. Marcus smiled the smile he'd perfected over decades. The one that said, I'm grateful you're doing the right thing instead of what he was thinking. You're only reviewing protocols because you're afraid I'll sue you next. Back at the hotel, he listened to the voicemail. The lawyer's voice was smooth, professional, the tone of someone who did this for a living and expected to win. Mr. Thompson, my name is Richard Crawford. I represent American Airlines in matters of passenger relations. We'd like to extend our deepest apologies for the incident on Flight 447 and discuss a resolution that respects your experience while allowing all parties to move forward constructively. We're prepared to offer substantial compensation and implement significant policy reforms. I'm confident we can reach an agreement that satisfies everyone involved. Marcus deleted the message. Called Barrett. They made contact. Want me to take the meeting? No. I'll do it. But you're coming with me, and we're recording everything. They met Friday morning at a neutral location, a conference room in a London law office that charged by the hour and didn't care who won as long as someone paid. Crawford brought 3 associates and a PowerPoint presentation. Marcus brought Barrett, a recording device, and zero interest in anything that sounded like compromise. Crawford started with apologies. Sincere, effusive apologies that managed to avoid actually admitting wrongdoing. Then he moved to the offer. $2 million, lifetime first-class status, public apology from the CEO, donation of $500,000 to a racial justice organization of Marcus's choosing, and implementation of new training protocols, all contingent, of course, on a mutual non-disclosure agreement and release of all claims. Marcus let him finish. Let the silence stretch until Crawford started to look uncomfortable. Then he leaned forward. No, Crawford blinked. I'm sorry? No, I'm not interested in your money or your apologies or your training protocols. I'm interested in accountability. Public accountability, the kind that can't be buried in settlement agreements. You're offering to pay me to disappear. To sign away my right to speak about what happened, to let Patricia Hendricks and Captain Wilson and Officer Blake and everyone else who enabled this escape with their pensions intact and their reputations protected by confidentiality clauses. Mr. Thompson, I understand your anger, do you? Marcus's voice stayed level, but something in it made Crawford lean back slightly. Do you understand what it's like to be 42 years old and successful and wealthy? And still get treated like a criminal because of your skin color? Do you understand what it's like to bleed on an airplane floor while people record it for entertainment? Do you understand what it's like to build a company worth billions and still have strangers assume you're in the wrong seat? Crawford's carefully constructed expression cracked slightly. We're trying to make this right, then make it right publicly. Fire everyone involved. Not quietly, not with golden parachutes. Fire them and make sure the world knows why. Disclose every discrimination complaint filed against your airline in the past decade. Submit to independent federal oversight. And drop every NDA you've ever made anyone sign in cases like mine. That's not realistic. Then we don't have a deal. Barrett pulled out his tablet, slid it across the table. Our counteroffer: full transparency, federal investigation, criminal charges where applicable, and victim compensation that doesn't require silence. Take it or we'll see you in court. Crawford looked at the document, face draining of color. This would destroy the careers of multiple employees. Good. They destroyed their own careers when they decided my skin color was probable cause. The meeting ended 20 minutes later with no agreement. Crawford left looking like he'd aged a decade. Barrett looked satisfied. Marcus just felt tired, not defeated, not uncertain, just tired of having to fight for the basic human dignity that other people took for granted. But he wasn't done fighting. That night, he released a public statement. Not through lawyers, not through PR firms, just him speaking directly to a camera in his hotel room, bandage still visible on his temple. My name is Marcus Thompson. 4 days ago, I was violently removed from a seat I paid for because American Airlines employees saw a black man in casual clothes and assumed I didn't belong. I was handcuffed, I was bleeding, I was humiliated in front of hundreds of witnesses. And when I made it clear who I was and what power I had, suddenly everyone wanted to apologize. He paused. Let that sink in. But here's the truth. I shouldn't have needed power for them to treat me with basic human dignity. The teenager flying to see her grandmother shouldn't need to be CEO of anything to sit in the seat she paid for. The surgeon trying to get to a medical conference shouldn't need to prove his credentials to a flight attendant. Every person deserves respect regardless of whether they have the resources to fight back. Another pause. American Airlines has offered me money to stay quiet. I'm refusing because this isn't about me. It's about the 47 other people who were profiled and settled and disappeared into NDAs. It's about everyone who comes after us. And it's about proving that power isn't just for personal gain. It's for protecting people who don't have it yet. He looked directly into the camera. So here's what happens next. I'm filing a federal civil rights lawsuit. I'm calling for congressional oversight of discrimination in the aviation industry. I'm demanding that every airline disclose their settlement history. And I'm establishing a fund to help victims who can't afford legal representation. Because if we're going to change the system, we change it for everyone. The video went viral faster than Jordan Mitchell's original footage. Within 12 hours, it had 23 million views. Within 24, senators were calling for hearings. Within 36, American stock had dropped another 8% and their CEO had resigned. And in a small apartment in suburban Atlanta, Patricia Hendricks watched the video on her phone while her lawyer explained that she was almost certainly going to prison. The federal courthouse in Atlanta smelled like marble and old wood, and the kind of institutional authority that was supposed to make everyone feel equal under the law. Marcus Thompson walked through the metal detectors on a Tuesday morning in September, 6 months after Flight 447, and felt every eye in the lobby track his movement. Some people recognized him from the video that now had 63 million views. Others just recognized power when they saw it. The civil trial was starting today, not criminal charges, not yet. Those were still winding through the DOJ with the speed of continental drift. But the civil case, Thompson versus American Airlines et al., was beginning in courtroom 5A with Judge Sarah Martinez presiding, and every major news network had cameras outside because this wasn't just a lawsuit anymore, it was a referendum. Barrett walked beside Marcus, leather briefcase in hand, expression calm. Behind them came the legal team, 4 attorneys who'd spent 6 months building a case from 47 individual stories of discrimination into a pattern so clear it was impossible to deny. And behind them, filling the gallery, sat the witnesses. Dr. Jamal Wilson in a charcoal suit that cost more than Patricia Hendricks earned in a month. Linda Morrison with her teenage daughter, the one who'd been questioned about her first-class ticket until she cried. David Rodriguez holding his wife's hand so tight his knuckles had gone white. They were ready. The question was whether justice was. American Airlines had deployed what Barrett called the scorched earth defense: deny everything, attack the victim's credibility, claim isolated incidents by rogue employees who'd already been terminated, and hope the jury believed that a $2 billion company couldn't possibly have known about systematic discrimination happening on its aircraft. Their lead attorney was Thomas Brennan, 67 years old, partner at a firm that specialized in making corporate liability disappear. He looked like Central Casting's idea of a defense lawyer. Silver hair, expensive suit, smile that suggested he knew something you didn't. Marcus's legal team was led by Jennifer Washington, 43, black woman who'd built her reputation defending civil rights cases that other firms thought were unwinnable. She'd taken one look at the evidence Emily Carson provided and told Marcus, "We're not settling. We're going to trial, and we're going to win so thoroughly they'll teach this case in law schools." The courtroom filled quickly. Marcus sat at the plaintiff's table, Barrett beside him, Washington organizing files with practiced efficiency. Across the aisle, Brennan and his team arranged their own materials with the confidence of people who'd never lost a case this public. Patricia Hendricks sat in the gallery looking 20 years older than she had 6 months ago. Her husband had filed for divorce 3 weeks after the video went viral. Her daughter had stopped taking her calls. She'd applied for 217 jobs since American terminated her and received 217 rejections. Every Google search of her name returned the video. Every background check flagged her as unemployable. She'd lost her house to foreclosure. She was living with her sister in a studio apartment in Marietta, and she was about to testify under oath about decisions she'd made that seemed so reasonable in the moment and so catastrophic in hindsight. Captain Davis Wilson sat 3 rows behind her, carefully not making eye contact. His pilot's license had been permanently revoked by the FAA after a 6-month investigation uncovered 12 other incidents, where he'd backed crew members without verifying facts. His pension had been cut by 40%. His wife had left him, taking their 2 kids to Oregon where her family lived and filing a restraining order that prohibited him from contact. He'd been arrested for DUI twice in 4 months, both times sitting in his car outside the airport where he used to work, drinking bourbon and watching planes take off without him. Officer Blake wasn't in the courtroom. He was in county jail serving 90 days for excessive force. 3rd conviction in his career, and his police union had quietly stopped returning his lawyer's calls. His wife had drained their joint bank account and disappeared with their son. The mortgage company was foreclosing on the house, and when he got out in 6 weeks, he'd be unemployable in law enforcement and working night shifts at a warehouse if he was lucky. Robert Whitmore sat in the back row trying to be invisible. The investment bank had fired him immediately after his quote about whether Marcus looked like first-class material became a cable news soundbite. His wife had filed for divorce and won custody of their children based on testimony about his history of racist comments at home. He'd lost his country club membership, his standing in professional organizations, and most of his friends. The civil suit Marcus filed against him personally had been settled for $200,000, and a public apology video that Whitmore had to record sitting in his new studio apartment because he'd lost the house in the divorce. He now sold insurance over the phone for $14 an hour and lived in constant terror that a customer would recognize his voice. Gerald Foster, the regional manager who'd created the discriminatory policies, wasn't in the courtroom either. He was in federal custody awaiting trial on civil rights conspiracy charges. The DOJ had built a case showing he'd systematically buried complaints, retaliated against employees who reported discrimination, and created training materials that used coded language to encourage racial profiling. If convicted, he faced up to 10 years in federal prison. His wife had left him. His children refused to speak to him. His legal fees had consumed his retirement savings. And his name had become shorthand for institutional racism in corporate America. Judge Martinez entered. Everyone stood. She told them to sit. She was 58, Latina, appointed to the federal bench by Obama and known for running a tight courtroom. She looked at both legal teams with an expression that suggested she'd already read all the filings and wasn't interested in theatrics. "We're here for opening statements in Thompson versus American Airlines. Ms. Washington, you may proceed." Jennifer Washington stood, walked to the jury box, made eye contact with each of the 12 people who would decide whether Marcus's pain had a dollar value attached to it. 6 women, 6 men, racially diverse, economically mixed, ages ranging from 23 to 67. The defense had tried to stack it with white conservatives. Washington had fought them to a standstill during voir dire. She spoke without notes. This case is about a simple question. Does power determine dignity, or does dignity exist regardless of power? Marcus Thompson is a successful man, CEO of a $2 billion company, wealthy, educated, accomplished. And on March 14th of this year, none of that mattered. Because when American Airlines employees looked at him, they didn't see his achievements. They saw his skin color, and they decided that was enough to justify violence. She paused. Let that settle. But Marcus Thompson isn't the only victim in this case. You're going to hear from Dr. Jamal Wilson, a surgeon who saves lives who was humiliated in front of his colleagues. You're going to hear from Linda Morrison, a tech executive who was accused of fraud for sitting in a seat she purchased. You're going to hear from David Rodriguez, a professor who was removed from a flight for reading a book in Spanish. Another pause. What connects these people? Not their professions, not their economic status. What connects them is a system that saw them as threats instead of passengers. A system that American Airlines built, maintained, and profited from. A system they're asking you to excuse as a few bad employees making isolated mistakes. She turned, pointed at the defense table. But the evidence will show this wasn't isolated. It was policy. Policy created by Gerald Foster and enforced by Patricia Hendricks and Captain Davis Wilson and dozens of other employees who knew exactly what they were doing. Policy that American Airlines management knew about, ignored, and covered up with settlement agreements and non-disclosure clauses. She walked back toward the plaintiff's table. Marcus Thompson didn't need to file this lawsuit. He has the resources to move on, to forget, to accept a settlement and put this behind him. But he chose to be here because he understands something the defendants hope you'll forget. Justice delayed for some is justice denied for all. She sat down. The jury looked thoughtful. Brennan looked unconcerned. Judge Martinez nodded at him. "Mr. Brennan, opening statement." Brennan stood slowly, buttoned his suit jacket, approached the jury with the casual confidence of a man who'd done this hundreds of times. "Ladies and gentlemen, my client deeply regrets what happened to Marcus Thompson. What he experienced was unacceptable, and American Airlines has taken immediate action. Patricia Hendricks was terminated. Captain Wilson's employment ended. Officer Blake is facing criminal charges. The system worked." He smiled slightly, inviting them to agree. "But Ms. Washington wants you to believe this was part of a conspiracy, that American Airlines, a company that serves millions of passengers every year, built a system designed to discriminate. The evidence won't support that claim. What you'll see instead are isolated incidents involving employees who made poor decisions and were held accountable." He paced slowly in front of the jury box. "Mr. Thompson is a wealthy man, a powerful man, and he has every right to be angry about what happened. But anger doesn't equal evidence of corporate conspiracy. You'll hear testimony about complaints and settlements, but you won't hear evidence that American Airlines management knew about a pattern or condoned discrimination. What you'll hear is that a large company, like any large organization, sometimes has employees who make mistakes. Brennan paused at the plaintiff's table, looked at Marcus. No one disputes that Mr. Thompson was wronged, but he's asking you to award damages based on the idea that American Airlines is systemically racist. That's a serious accusation, and when you examine the evidence carefully, you'll find it's not supported by facts. It's supported by emotion and anecdote, and the understandable desire for someone to pay for a terrible experience. He returned to his seat. The jury looked less certain now. Washington called Dr. Wilson first. He took the stand in his suit that whispered money and achievement, swore to tell the truth, and began narrating the story Marcus already knew. Flight to Dallas in 2018, Patricia Hendricks questioning his ticket, Captain Wilson's refusal to check the manifest, the humiliation of being asked to prove he belonged somewhere he'd paid to be. But Washington pushed further. Dr. Wilson, did you file a complaint after the incident? Yes. Formal written complaint with American Airlines customer service. What happened with that complaint? I received a call from their legal department 3 days later. They offered me $50,000 to sign a release and non-disclosure agreement. Did they admit wrongdoing? No. The agreement specifically stated they denied all allegations and the settlement was being offered to avoid the expense of litigation. Did you sign it? Dr. Wilson's jaw tightened. Yes, I signed it. I told myself it was the practical choice, that fighting would cost more than it was worth. But I've regretted it every day since. Why? Because my silence enabled them to do the same thing to other people, including Mr. Thompson. Brennan cross-examined, tried to paint Dr. Wilson as a man motivated by money then and now, but Washington had prepared him well. Doctor. Wilson stayed calm, stayed on message. I'm not here for money. I'm here because I should have been here 6 years ago. Linda Morrison testified next. Described being accused of having a fraudulent upgrade in 2020, produced emails showing American's legal team had offered her $75,000 and an NDAA within 48 hours of her complaint. Explained how accepting felt like the only option when she had a mortgage and 2 kids in college. Washington entered the settlement agreement into evidence. The judge allowed it over Brennan's objection. David Rodriguez took the stand after lunch. Quiet, dignified, still angry in a way that 6 months hadn't dulled. He described being removed from a flight for suspicious behavior, which turned out to be reading Don Quixote in the original Spanish. Described the stares, the whispers, the assumption that he must be doing something wrong because he looked wrong. You filed a complaint? Yes. They settled for $15,000 and made me sign an agreement saying I couldn't discuss the incident. Why did you agree to that? Because I was exhausted. Because I had already lost a business deal worth $50,000 because I missed the flight. Because fighting felt like pouring good money after bad. Do you regret accepting the settlement? Rodriguez looked directly at the jury. Every single day. Because I know they did the same thing to someone else the next week. And the week after that. And they kept doing it until Marcus Thompson refused to be quiet. Washington let that answer hang in the air before she sat down. The defense tried to discredit the victims, tried to suggest they were coordinating their testimony, lying for financial gain, exploiting a tragic incident for personal benefit. But the emails Emily Carson had provided made coordination irrelevant. The pattern was documented. The cover-up was systematic, and no amount of cross-examination could erase the 47 settlement agreements Washington entered into evidence. Emily Carson testified on day 3. She looked smaller on the witness stand, younger than her 29 years, terrified in a way that came from knowing she was burning every bridge behind her. Ms. Carson, how long did you work for American Airlines? 7 years. In that time, how many incidents did you witness involving passengers of color being questioned about their seat assignments? Emily swallowed hard. At least 20 that I can remember clearly. Probably more. Did you report any of these incidents? I reported 3. All 3 times I was told by my supervisor that the flight attendants were following standard procedures. What happened when you continued to express concern? I was warned that questioning my colleagues' judgment could be considered insubordination, that my performance reviews would reflect my inability to function as part of a team. So you stopped reporting? Yes, I'm not proud of it, but I stopped. Washington pulled out a thick folder. Your Honor, I'd like to enter Exhibit 47, internal emails from American Airlines HR department regarding discrimination complaints. Brennan objected. The judge overruled him. Washington began reading emails aloud. HR representatives discussing how to minimize payouts. Legal team coordinating settlement offers before complaints reach the EEOC. Regional managers like Gerald Foster praising employees for maintaining brand standards after discrimination incidents. One email from Foster to Patricia Hendricks dated 2019. Your vigilance in ensuring our premium cabins maintain appropriate demographics is noted and appreciated. Continue the excellent work. The jury shifted uncomfortably. Brennan's confidence started to crack. Washington called her expert witness, a sociologist from Northwestern who'd studied implicit bias in service industries. He testified for 3 hours about pattern recognition, institutional discrimination, and the way coded language like brand standards and appropriate demographics functioned as permission structures for prejudice. Brennan's cross-examination tried to discredit the expert's methodology. The expert calmly explained that 47 documented incidents following the same pattern wasn't anecdotal evidence. It was statistical significance. The defense called their witnesses on day 5. Current American Airlines executives who swore they'd had no knowledge of discriminatory policies. HR representatives who claimed complaints were investigated thoroughly. Regional managers who insisted Gerald Foster was a rogue actor who'd hidden his behavior from upper management. Washington tore them apart on cross-examination, produced emails showing executives had been copied on complaint summaries, highlighted the fact that 47 settlements should have triggered some kind of pattern analysis, pointed out that American Airlines spent more on settlement NDAs than they would have spent on bias training. The most devastating moment came when Washington cross-examined American's VP of Customer Experience, a white man in his 50s who kept insisting the company took discrimination seriously. Mr. Harrison, how many passengers filed racial discrimination complaints against American Airlines in the past 5 years? Harrison consulted notes. Approximately 160. How many resulted in employee termination? Before Mr. Thompson's incident? None. How many resulted in formal investigations? Harrison shifted in his seat. We have a process for reviewing complaints. That wasn't my question. How many resulted in formal investigations with documented findings? 12. And in those 12 investigations, how many employees were found to have violated policy? 7. What happened to those 7 employees? Additional training was mandated. So to be clear, in 5 years, 160 passengers alleged racial discrimination. 7 employees were found to have violated policy, and none of them were terminated until Marcus Thompson's video went viral. Harrison's face flushed. The incidents were reviewed in context and appropriate action was taken. Washington pulled out another document. Your Honor, Exhibit 62. Mr. Harrison's email to the executive team 3 days after Mr. Thompson's incident, recommending immediate termination of all involved employees to contain public relations damage. The courtroom went silent. Brennan looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. Washington read from the email. Quote, "We need to make an example of the Atlanta crew to demonstrate our commitment to diversity. even though their actions were consistent with how we've handled similar situations in the past." Unquote. Harrison opened his mouth. Nothing came out. So the terminations weren't because American Airlines suddenly discovered discrimination was wrong. They were damage control. Brennan objected. Judge Martinez sustained it, but the jury had already heard enough. Closing arguments came on day 8. Washington spoke for 90 minutes, methodically laying out the evidence. Pattern of discrimination, corporate knowledge, systematic cover-up. She ended by looking at Marcus. Marcus Thompson didn't ask to be a symbol. He asked to sit in a seat he purchased. American Airlines responded with violence, then tried to buy his silence. When he refused, they claimed ignorance of a pattern their own emails proved they knew about and enabled. The question for you isn't whether American Airlines made a mistake. The question is whether you'll hold them accountable for a system they built, profited from, and only changed when the world was watching. Brennan's closing was shorter, more defensive. He talked about rogue employees and isolated incidents, and the impossibility of monitoring every interaction in a company with 90,000 workers. He asked the jury to consider proportionality, to remember that American Airlines had already taken corrective action, to avoid sending a message that would bankrupt companies for the actions of individuals. But he couldn't explain the emails, couldn't justify the 47 settlements, couldn't make the jury forget that appropriate demographics meant exactly what it sounded like. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the forewoman stood with a verdict sheet in her hand and an expression that suggested she'd spent those 6 hours arguing with people who wanted to give American Airlines the benefit of doubt she wasn't willing to extend. Judge Martinez read the verdict aloud. Count 1, violation of civil rights in favor of plaintiff Marcus Thompson. Count 2, negligent supervision in favor of plaintiff. Count 3, punitive damages in favor of plaintiff. The courtroom erupted. Judge Martinez gavelled for order. Damages awarded to Marcus Thompson, $8 million compensatory, $12 million punitive. Additional damages to be awarded to class action members in amounts to be determined in subsequent proceedings. Marcus felt nothing. Not triumph, not satisfaction. Just exhausted certainty that this was one battle in a war that would never completely end. But outside the courthouse, where cameras waited and reporters shouted questions, he stood on the steps and spoke into microphones. This verdict doesn't undo what happened. It doesn't erase anyone's pain, but it proves that silence is more expensive than accountability. American Airlines will pay $20 million because they chose profit over principle. Patricia Hendricks and Captain Wilson will never work in this industry again because they chose prejudice over professionalism. And every airline in America is watching, understanding that the cost of discrimination just became too high to ignore. A reporter shouted a question. What message does this send? Marcus looked directly at the camera. That power isn't about what you can take, it's about what you can protect, and every person who comes after me deserves the protection this verdict just created. The verdict triggered an avalanche. Within 24 hours, United Airlines announced a top-to-bottom review of discrimination policies. Delta released all passengers from previous settlement NDAs. Southwest pledged to create an independent oversight board. The FAA proposed new federal regulations requiring airlines to report discrimination complaints quarterly. Congress scheduled hearings. Senator Elizabeth Warren called for the Thompson Protocol to become federal law. Conservative senators who'd initially dismissed the case as woke overreach suddenly discovered concern for civil rights when their constituents sent emails about being profiled. And in living rooms across America, flight attendants and pilots and gate agents who'd been quietly enforcing informal quotas and making snap judgments based on appearance started wondering if their careers were worth it. 3 weeks after the verdict, Marcus stood in the Skylink Aviation headquarters in Atlanta, looking at architectural plans for an expansion that would add 30 aircraft to the fleet. The Boeing deal had closed. The British Airways partnership was generating revenue ahead of projections, and the company's stock had climbed 18% since the trial ended, because investors suddenly understood that the CEO who refused to stay silent was also the CEO who wouldn't tolerate discrimination in his own organization. Barrett walked in, tablet in hand. "Thought you'd want to see this. The Thompson Equity Fund just received its 100th application for legal support. We're fully funded for the next 3 years." Marcus nodded. "How many cases have we taken?" 47 so far, all former victims of airline discrimination who signed NDAs. We're helping them break those agreements and file new claims. Any pushback from the airlines? Barrett smiled. "They're settling before we even file. Turns out nobody wants to be the next American Airlines." Marcus looked back at the architectural plans. Sometimes justice wasn't about punishment. Sometimes it was about making the cost of injustice higher than the cost of change. His phone buzzed. Text from Emily Carson, who'd gotten a job with a passenger advocacy nonprofit after American blacklisted her from the industry. She'd sent a photo. A young black woman in a first-class seat, smiling at the camera, holding a sign that read, "Because of Marcus Thompson, nobody questioned my ticket today." Marcus saved the photo. These were the moments that mattered. Not the verdict, not the money, not the headlines. The quiet victories of people who'd never know his name but benefited from his refusal to accept that dignity was negotiable. 6 months after the verdict, Patricia Hendricks was serving coffee at a truck stop off I-75. The job paid $9 an hour plus tips that barely covered her studio apartment rent. Every day travelers passed through. Some recognized her, most looked away. A few said something cruel. She took it all with the same fixed smile she'd used on passengers, understanding now what that smile had cost other people. Captain Wilson was driving for Uber when his rating dropped below 4.5 and the company deactivated him. He'd applied to every regional airline, every cargo carrier, every aviation-adjacent job that would let him near an aircraft. Every application got rejected within 24 hours. His name was in databases now, flagged as unemployable. He lived in a basement apartment his brother owned and spent his nights watching planes on flight tracking apps, following routes he used to fly. Officer Blake got out of jail and took a warehouse job loading trucks on the night shift. His supervisor was a black man 10 years younger who'd graduated from Morehouse and was working his way through an MBA. Blake called him sir and kept his head down and understood that this was his life now. The uniform was gone. The authority was gone. The ability to make people afraid with just his presence was gone. All that remained was the knowledge that he'd traded someone else's dignity for a power that evaporated the moment someone filmed him using it. Robert Whitmore worked his phone sales job and lived in his studio apartment and watched his children grow up through Facebook photos his ex-wife posted. He'd sent them letters. They'd returned them unopened. He'd tried calling. They'd blocked his number. The $200,000 he'd paid Marcus in settlement had come from his retirement account. He'd be working until he died, cold calling strangers who Googled his name and hung up when they recognized it. Gerald Foster sat in federal prison awaiting sentencing. His lawyer said he'd probably get 7 years, maybe 5 with good behavior. His wife had remarried. His children had legally changed their last name. The retirement savings were gone to legal fees. When he got out, he'd be a 63-year-old convicted felon with no prospects and a name that meant institutional racism in the public consciousness. These were the consequences, not abstract, not theoretical. Real people living real lives that would never recover from choices they'd made when they thought power protected them from accountability. But Marcus wasn't thinking about them when he boarded a flight to London 2 years after the verdict. Same airline, American, because he wanted to prove a point. Same route, same aircraft type, but everything else was different. The gate agent scanned his boarding pass with a professional smile that looked genuine. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Thompson. We're honored to have you with us today. The flight attendant, a young black woman named Keisha who'd been inspired to apply after watching Marcus's testimony, greeted him at the aircraft door. "Good morning, sir. You're in 1A. Let me know if you need anything." Marcus stowed his bag, settled into the seat, and noticed a teenager in 1B. Black kid, maybe 17, wearing a hoodie that probably cost $40 and looking nervous in the way Marcus remembered feeling the first time he flew first class. "First time up here?" The kid nodded. "Scholarship to Oxford, they upgraded me. I kept thinking they'd realize it was a mistake." Marcus smiled. "It wasn't a mistake. You earned it, and if anyone suggests otherwise, you have them call me." He handed the teenager his business card. The kid stared at it, eyes widening as he recognized the name. "You're Marcus Thompson, from the video. That's me. My mom made me watch your testimony, said I needed to understand that staying quiet never changed anything. Smart woman. What's your name?" "Marcus. Marcus Jr. My parents named me after you." Marcus felt something catch in his throat. He hadn't expected that. Hadn't considered that his refusal to disappear might inspire people to name their children after the choice he'd made. "Well, Marcus Jr., let me tell you something important. This seat isn't a privilege. It's not a reward for being exceptional. It's a right that comes with purchasing a ticket. Don't ever let anyone make you prove you deserve to be somewhere you paid to be." The teenager nodded, still gripping the business card like it was a talisman. The flight took off smoothly. Marcus opened his laptop, pulled up projections for Skylink's next expansion. But his mind kept drifting to the kid beside him, wearing a name that meant something different now than it had before Flight 447. Somewhere over the Atlantic, Marcus thought about his mother's voice. "Stay calm, baby. Let them show who they are." He'd stayed calm. They'd shown who they were, and the world had watched and decided that the cost of their revelation was higher than they could afford to pay. That wasn't revenge. That was accountability. And accountability, Marcus had learned, was the only currency that purchased lasting change. When the plane landed, Marcus Jr. turned to him before deplaning. "Thank you for everything you did, for everyone who comes after." Marcus shook the kid's hand. "Thank you for carrying the name well. Make them remember it means something." He walked off the aircraft into Heathrow Terminal, past shops and restaurants and travelers who didn't recognize him and others who did. The bandage was gone from his temple. The bruises had faded, but the memory remained, sharp and clear and permanent. Because some things couldn't be erased with time. They could only be transformed into fuel for the work that came after, and the work was never finished.